Good morning, everyone. My name is Latika, and I'm happy to be here sharing Sunday service with Nitai. I'd like to welcome all of our guests and visitors and congratulate those of you who are here who have just completed our 4-week YTT program, our Yoga Teacher Training Program, and especially to welcome those of you who are here for the first time weekend. Thank you for coming. It's been our pleasure to share what we have here at Ananda with you. I'd like to read now from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This week's topic is Reincarnation, the Spiral Staircase. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In the book of Revelation, chapter 3, Jesus Christ tells us, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out." There is a difference between church dogmas, which are based on reasoned deductions from scriptural statements, and the pronouncements of wisdom, which are based on the inner realization of scriptural truths. Reason, like a train, can only follow already existing tracks of human experience. Human memory, being short, is seldom able to cross back over the threshold of a person's present existence. Biblical references to previous lifetimes on earth are overlooked in the deductive process, and we find them therefore excluded from the body of official dogma. Nevertheless, such references exist. The Bible itself presents them, as does Jesus in this passage, not as abstract teaching, but as direct personal perception of truth. In the same way, Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, silences Arjuna's reasonable doubts on the subject, not by reasoned argument, but by the frank statement contained in the 4th chapter of that great scripture. Arjuna, you and I have passed through many births. I know all of them, though you, O chastiser of foes, recall them not. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
So, welcome again. This morning's topic is reincarnation. For those of us who were raised in the West, it was probably a new concept that we picked up sometime after childhood. If you're raised in the East, something you grew up with, doesn't seem strange at all. But it's one of those interesting, and it does have a lot of effect in our lives. The whole idea of in the readings, he's talking about church dogmas as opposed to revealed truths. I remember my first experience with that happened when I was about 6 years old. I was raised in the Catholic Church. And I had, been going to catechism classes, and by that time I knew that there were certain things that if you did, they were called mortal sins. And those were the things that you got tossed into hell for. And this list started to grow as I went through catechism. But one of them was that you had to be at church on Sunday morning. Now, it might have changed since then. It's been a long time ago. But at that time, it would get you into hell. And so, I'd learned it, and, I could spout it back in catechism class. But I noticed that my father had a kind of a cavalier attitude towards Sunday morning. Sometimes he might go, and sometimes he might go home and stay home and read the newspaper or watch a football game or something else would come up. And somewhere in that point, in my mind, it started to click. Wait a minute, here's this rule over here that mortal sins get you into hell, and one of them is missing Mass on Sunday morning. And here's my dad, who, he was a good guy. I liked my dad. He was a good father. And he would stay home and, do other things. And I said, oh, wait a minute. It didn't compute. It didn't make sense. And of course, you have kind of two choices then, is just to kind of, oh, well, the church must be right, or to kind of look at your common sense and say, well, this just seems like garbage. It doesn't seem to make any sense. Why? How did it get that way? Of course, I was too young to know. But it was the beginning of my own journey of wrestling with kind of established religion. It took me another 10 or 12 years to actually decide that I didn't want anything to do with it. But it is a fascinating part of how churches evolve. The whole idea of reincarnation, here in the reading this morning, it's a saying of Jesus, pretty clearly putting it out there. There are many other parts in the Bible, if you want to do research, to find out that, yeah, reincarnation is referred to several times in different ways. One time somebody comes up and asks Jesus why this man in front of him, he's been blind since birth, and they ask him, was it a sin of his? And Jesus goes on and just kind of talks to them. He doesn't say it wasn't. He doesn't really address it in that case. There's the whole thing about Elijah and John the Baptist in the Bible, and all the hints that maybe they were connected in soul nature. So we have this teaching, and it is helpful. What happens if you just, if you try to think, okay, why did they kind of cut that out? Why would people who are trying to establish a church cut out reincarnation? Well, it puts the focus strongly on this one lifetime. And there are good parts to that, because you could get lazy if you believed in reincarnation. You say, well, okay, I don't feel up to it this lifetime. Maybe next time, I might get around to it. And so, yeah, that's one reason it might do it. You also, you're kind of tied to this lifetime more, so you might take the church more seriously, which I think was probably the basis for it, just to say, well, yeah, we're trying to build this way to get people to follow our teachings and follow us as clergy. So, but you also, when you make little changes, and maybe they might have understood it. Of course, reincarnation isn't obvious when you're just kind of in a lifetime. You try to think, well, I can't remember my past lifetime, so maybe they don't exist. There is some, fair amount of research now. People told me a couple of books out where people track back people's memories and have done a lot to show that. But for most people, it's not that obvious. But you always get into trouble when you start to play around with those things, and life doesn't really make that much sense anymore. You watch and you see without reincarnation, they look like absurdities or inconsistencies. God must be kind of strange in his creation, because some people get sick and some people don't get sick. Some people die when they're really young. Some people hang on for way longer than you think they should. And so there's all these different things that happen. People have accidents, other people don't have accidents, and it looks kind of random. And that's fairly undermining, if you really look at it. And part of you is kind of, I believe the doctrines of my church. The other part of you is saying, I don't understand how life works. It looks like it's chaos or randomness to me. Well, it kind of short circuits your ability to love God. How can you love somebody who seems like they're kind of just tossing the cards up in the air all the time and playing a 52 pickup with your life? So it's something that it just doesn't help. It doesn't help to create that connection. The whole idea of how we relate to God is very different in different cultures. Right now, I teach high school and college during the week, and one of the classes I've got, we're studying world religions. So I was introducing the high school students to the Bible, because if you grow up here, you don't have a whole lot of experience with the Bible when you're growing up. And I wanted to make sure they had that before they leave the community. And so we were reading the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and stories like that. And the first time I made the assignment, one boy was down the hall. I said, why don't you work on the assignment while we're doing other things? He went down the hall, and he comes running up the hall after about 10 minutes. He says, who is this? What is this all about? He says, this is weird. This whole idea of this Old Testament God, kind of sending people off the best way and that way. And, it didn't resonate with his experience of life. And it was just interesting. You see, it's turned off. Okay. Okay. But you, see, where was I? Let's see. Old Testament, the Old Testament God, yeah. You have a God that underneath it seems like not a real nice guy. It seems like he's kind of an authoritarian. It wasn't just a random thought that Michelangelo painted him the way he did in the Sistine Chapel. Just kind of this kind of gruff-looking character. And I was telling the kids, I said, one of the reasons for studying this is to know when you go out into the broader world and the word God comes up, and you're going to be thinking one thing. You're going to be thinking, God of love and closeness and somebody you can feel really in tune with. That's not what they're going to be thinking about. When you say the word God to them, they're thinking of this guy that, just is all about judgment and anger and things like that. So you see that kind of a idea start to creep into religion. Reincarnation explains a lot of those things in a broader way. Reincarnation says, well, when a tragedy happens, it's tied into something we can understand because somebody's made a mistake in the past and they need to learn that lesson, so this tragedy comes into their lives. And it's an opportunity for them to grow from it. It helps us enormously when we face the tragedies in our own lives because one response is to blame other people. Why did that fool run into my car? Or, why did this disease come to me? Why me? Why, and this whole self-pity comes in, and we really can't make use of the lesson. It happens to us anyway, but we don't learn from it, and we go on. We have to learn the same lesson later on. Well, reincarnation teaches that attitude of say, whoa, if something comes to me, it must be mine. Must come from something I've done in the past. I may not remember it, probably don't. I may have a feeling though. Sometimes you get a little feeling of, oh, this seems right for me in this lifetime to get this kind of a test. And you go and you can relate to it. You can try to receive the lesson and let go of that particular karma. So it's a big part of making use of an incarnation. So in a way, it has a flip side. The original idea of cutting out reincarnation is to try to focus on this lifetime, but in some ways, you lose the ability to understand why it's happening, and then you can't get the response, the lessons, the growth that you might possibly get. So it's a very important teaching. The progress that we're making, the soul evolution that comes into play here is a really important part because it's not that we all come into a lifetime and we all have the same chance to make it. Everybody's got different strengths and weaknesses. You come into a particular body. If you're 5'3", you forget about being a basketball player. If you're a strong, powerful man, you might go out there and you might have a chance to go out and head up General Motors or something so you can go into bankruptcy or whatever. But you'll have these opportunities that go with a certain body type or a certain mind type. You have the minds seem to be kind of somewhat random. Some people, their minds work really well with numbers, and some people, they just see a number and they just kind of fall apart. Or words. Some people love crafting words and getting the right, grammar and things, and other people, it just doesn't connect. I mean, if you teach high school, you see it all the time. The English teachers can scratch their heads and say, why has he learned this 7 years in a row and still doesn't know where to put a comma? But you just see that there's this evolutionary process behind the scenes that's happening. The body's pretty clear. It's pretty clear. It doesn't take too much introspection to see that we're not really this body because right in front of our eyes, our bodies are changing. They're not what they were 20 years ago. They're really different. I see it as a teacher. I see it in the early end. You watch these people that are, we come into our junior high school at 12 years old. They leave at 18. And my gosh, the changes that happen between 12 and 18, they're mind-boggling. Not just the physical size, but everything else changes. And then at the other end of life, the last 20 years, you start to see the other process. Things start falling off. The wheels start falling off, and things have to don't work, and you just there. So you think, okay, well, I'm not, The problem, of course, with the body is that you've got it with you all the time. You kind of familiarity is there. You know, just every time you go in and you brush your teeth, you look in the mirror, it's the same old person in there staring at you, and so you could think that maybe you're that body, but I think it's fairly easy to let go of that. The mind's a little different. It's you know, are we our mind? You know, it's we had an interesting experience about a week ago. We took the school ice skating, and one of the students was trying out to see how fast he could go, and his tips of his skates hit the wrong way, and he went to do this big flip, ended up crashing down the ice and was knocked unconscious for about 4 or 5 minutes. So, you know, gradually came back to consciousness, and you know, we came across and was sitting there in the bench, and you know, we're talking to him, and you know, he's really not quite there. It's like, how old are you? And you know, he's about 16 now. I think I'm 10. I'm not sure. and interestingly enough, he has a wonderful mind, a very powerful mind. And one of the first things I asked him this obscure mathematical theorem, and he was able to answer it. He remembered. So it was coming back in bits and pieces, and just. But it was also, for the other kids, you know, all of his friends, it was kind of scary because here's this guy, he's really smart guy, and all of a sudden he can't remember how old he is, you know, and it's like from 1 minute to the next, and like, but you could see him kind of, his something be in the back of his being, trying to sort through this maze of what all of a sudden wasn't very familiar. And I remember him looking at, all of a sudden he focused on one of the teachers. He just looked at that teacher for about, 3 or 4 minutes, just kind of staring, because you could see there was something that was familiar there, and he was trying to use that as a cue to kind of get everything else put back together. So, so the mind didn't work very well in that case. There was some static in the system, but it was still that same young man. You could still see it was the same kind of consciousness that was kind of working through that. Part of what this does in reincarnation is it gives you enormous amounts of empathy for everybody else, because you see people in different handicaps, not only physical or mental handicaps, but moral handicaps. People have different weaknesses, and you can kind of relate and say, yeah, I could see that. You probably were that way at some point, and you start to, so it helps definitely in the heart level. But this evolution of what is it that's behind the body and the mind, you know, Personality is, you know, definitely plays a role. Different stories of, you know, like the quality of anger, kind of Master talking about. If you don't get rid of anger in this lifetime, you bring it back with you, and you have to work through it. Completely different scenario, completely different body, mind, but the anger would still be there behind, and you'd still have to work on it. Some things can be worked on more easily in some kinds of lifetimes than others. If you're a king, your anger, you probably won't work on it too much because nobody's going to challenge you in that lifetime. You're going to just go out there and you can be angry and ordering people around your whole life and never make any progress in that particular area. But if you're born into a more humble circumstance, you might be challenged to not express that anger in the same way and have a chance to work on it. So you never know. It's the vast wisdom that sets up this whole cycle of reincarnation is so amazing. It's hard to pick out all the little subparts and things, but you can see, underneath it, you see this validity. But what is it? I remember there was also the story of Judas that Master kind of completes the story. And everybody knows the story of Judas, where greed, among other things, got in the way, and he betrayed Jesus. And Master said, well, he finally was liberated last century, and that he had come and under the care of Ramakrishna, and that he had finally finished off all that karma. It took about 2,000 years. We don't know how many lifetimes it was. But the interesting thing was they said he still had a little attachment to money, even in that last incarnation. That was still that echo of that flaw that he'd had way before. So that part of his personality had kind of been carried along with him. And finally, you know, Ramakrishna, the other monks were teasing this one about his attachment to money, because he was the treasurer of the organization, actually. And Ramakrishna said, no, don't tease him, don't tease him. He says he's had enough suffering on that quality. So these personality things do carry farther along rather than the body might just be one lifetime. These things might be many. But even that is not the essence of what's happening. The essence of what's happening is this soul evolution. Each of us is moving along this path, and we don't know. We don't know when we started. We don't know when the person next to us started. And it's so fruitless to compare and judge other people. Swami talked about a little thing that rang true for me. He says, when you're on the freeway, and you're at you're kind of going through cars, and all of a sudden you're at the head of the whole cars. Everybody's behind you, and you're kind of driving, and all of a sudden you look ahead, and there's another whole group of cars up ahead of you, and now instead of being in front, now you're in the behind, and and so it's hard to say, oh my gosh, I'm doing great compared to anybody else. The only one you're doing great is comparison to yourself. Are you making the progress? Especially when you think that if you read the autobiography of Yogi and they talk about the astral realms and they talk about all these souls that don't even have to come back to the planet anymore. They've already graduated from here and they're working on subtler forms of karma. Yeah, you can't get too big about yourself, even if you do whatever you think makes a saint in this lifetime. So this progress, but we can see the progress happening, and we can, if we kind of understand it. It's embedded in the teachings of India, and if you look deeply, it's embedded in the teachings everywhere, that there is a progression of consciousness, but it's most clearly described in the Indian teachings with the idea of the different stages of evolution. First one being the kind of the stage of material, just fulfilling material desires. It's has a word in Sanskrit, the Shudra stage, but it's basically at that stage of consciousness, the soul only is interested in kind of feeding its physical desires. You can think that makes sense if you're new. If you come into this body for the first time and you kind of look, oh my gosh, look how it works. Wow, I'd like to see what happens here. I'd like to see what happens here. And wow, that tasted good. I think I'll do that a few more times. And because it's new, and every time you have something new, you want to play with it and see what happens. And so that stage is natural. It's the first stage of the soul's evolution on this plane. But it, of course, if we were the body, that would be all there was to it. But since we're not never going to be completely satisfied with just fulfilling the body's needs, because we're not. It ignores the rest of us, of who we are on deeper levels. So the soul eventually figures that out and says, oh my gosh, the next stage for most souls is that I think I could fulfill those desires better if I just had more money or more power or more energy. And so you move up into the second stage, the Vaishya stage, where you start to use, more creativity comes into the system, and you can also explore the whole world of mental creation. Like, oh, what if I made that theory, or I created that play, or all these different things where you're creating with just out of the sheer exhilaration of trying things out. So you have that second stage, and they're both kind of tied into material desires, but one more energetically than the first. And then you do find that those simply don't satisfy on the deep enough level, and there is that kind of yearning that kind of keeps nibbling at you underneath all of your outward experiences. And that's when we enter the third stage, which we start to think in terms of, they call it the Kshatriya or warrior stage. It's the stage of really trying to improve ourselves, basically not being satisfied with having certain flaws or certain problems in our personalities, and really trying to get over those things like anger and greed and lust and all the other ones that come in there, and just say, okay, I'm going to try to, I'm going to use this lifetime to grow. And when that temptation comes in to steal or shoplift or not really be honest with the finances, I'm going to resist it. I'm going to try to move beyond it. I'm going to put out the energy that it takes to become a better person that way. It's also a stage where we start to not only be solely interested in our own welfare, we start to think about other people's welfare and how could I help? The idea with greed, instead of personal gain, you start to think in terms of helping other people. Swami talked about one little experience he had early on where he really had a desire for some kind of, I forget what it was now, it might have been candy or something. And it was there, and he kind of acknowledged that it was there, but the way he's fulfilling it was he bought enough so that he could share it with his friends. It wasn't just feeding himself, his body, but it was also sharing that with other people, which is a great way to kind of evolve in those ways. But so that's this expansion of consciousness beyond this little tiny thinking of maybe I'm just this body and just this mind. So we start to reach out to help others. And that's great. It's a tremendous amount of soul evolution occurs at that stage. But it's also limiting in the final analysis, because we start to see that it doesn't always work. You're nice to somebody, you try to help somebody, and they get mad at you. They don't appreciate what you're trying to do. Even maybe you do help them, and they take that help and abuse it in some way. You might give them money. Like this is, you see somebody comes up to you on the street and they ask for a handout, and you say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to help you," and you give them the money, and then you kind of watch them, and they turn around the corner and head out for the liquor store. And, so it's like it doesn't provide the kind of response and result that we would like to have for our efforts. On a planetary level, you watch people, trying to help on different causes on a physical plane. I think I shared this story recently, but there was a wonderful example of this. There was a young woman who, her name is Julia Butterfly, I think she has a last name too, I can't remember what it is, Hill. And I love this story because it really showed the difference between this Kshatriya third stage and the fourth stage, which is the moving into the more spiritual thing. She was drawn into the activist movement up in Northern California maybe 15 years ago. There was some clear cutting going along in an old growth forest. And some of the activists were tree sitting. They would go up in the trees and they would sit in the trees to keep them from being cut down. And it made headlines, at least in California, for a while. So she went up there kind of just kind of partly out of curiosity. She liked trees, and she wanted to help with that, but she wasn't kind of committed in terms of joining an organization or anything. But she happened to be there at this particular time, and they ran out of tree sitters, basically. Nobody was available to sit in this tree. And it was one of the real special trees in the forest. So she said, "Well, okay, I'll go up. How long do you want me up there?" They said, "Oh, a couple days is probably enough." So what you do is you climb up these big trees. You're about 150 feet off the ground, and they have a little platform up there. And so she went up there, which I think a lot of courage just in itself for most people. But she got up there, and the reinforcements didn't arrive. And so if she got down, the lumber company was going to cut the tree down. So she stayed up there, and she stayed up there, and she stayed up there. And she ended up being up there, I think it was a whole year, a little over a year, if I'm not mistaken. So she went through the winter and all the different seasons, the storms and things like that. And she found a really interesting thing, because one of the reasons she hadn't joined the organizations, whatever it was that was forming to resist this, is that she just didn't feel quite in tune with the people there. And she didn't quite know why. But when she goes up in the tree, she realized what it was. She realized that in order to stay up in that tree, her energy had to be clear and strong. And anytime she started to get into anger or hatred, she felt her energy just dropping. And so when the loggers came in the woods, everybody else is jeering at them and saying, "Get out of here and down with whatever the whole anti-energy." And she said she couldn't get into that. She couldn't let herself go that way, because she realized that her power, the power to keep her up there, was on a level of love and appreciation and joy. And she had to train herself up there in that tree to learn to love those loggers when she started talking to them and interacting with them. And it was a whole different wavelength that came in. And I love the story because it just shows that yes, there's a certain level you can grow to by trying to go out there and help the world, help the different environmental causes and things like that. But if you have to purify it eventually, it can't stay on that level of anti or no or all these things. It's really there has to be a deeper motivation, and that motivation is moving into that spiritual domain. The idea of love, forgiveness, all those qualities that are of the top level, the fourth level, the Brahman level in that yogic approach. So we see that movement. We see that movement that we have to learn, and then that's when we get into the real end of the soul evolution, because then we start to see that really what we're trying to discover beneath the body, beneath the mind, and beneath the personality are those infinite universal soul qualities that are at the central part of all of us. And they come out in those terms of love, joy, peace, forgiveness, all those different things. And as we start to align ourselves with those energies, we find ourselves, first of all, we get incredible power because we're now in tune with the energy of the infinite. And that's that same energy that created everything that exists. And we start to be able to see, oh, we're just a part of that. We're just a part of that flow. And we can really start to serve. And that's when you see the saints, you see, people who just have enormous energy in their lives. Where does that energy come from? It doesn't come from Wheaties. it comes from the fact that they've done that homework. They've had that soul evolution where they really learn to tap into those deeper things, and then they're able to follow that. However that energy wants to manifest, and there's a unique manifestation for every single soul on this plane. That some people are drawn. They're drawn to a very contemplative life, and they may be meditating 12, 18, 20 hours a day. Other people are out there serving in a particular way. They're serving through education. They're serving through health care. They're serving through any way that, when you're reaching out and making other people's lives easier. But you're serving not from your own ideas of what's right. You're serving from that sense of attunement. But this is how God wants to play through me. And that happens, that's so fascinating. That's one of the great things I've been able to be here at Ananda for about 35 years now, and I've had countless opportunities to watch Swami Kriyananda and his way of interacting on this plane. And it's just been an incredible education on what all those things mean in a very practical way. So we all have that opportunity to continue our soul evolution and to keep saying yes. One of the things, say yes to life. Say yes to whatever comes. Right now, we have to learn how to say yes to an economic, well, we say disaster yet, maybe not quite yet, but definitely huge economic problems coming under the country and the world. There are lessons to be learned there. There are lessons for the planet, but there are also personal lessons to be learned. And if we come at it with that level, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see what can happen here. Then we'll make use of it. If we start to say, oh, this isn't my problem, this is the Republicans' problem or something, then you just you don't get to take a chance to take advantage of that opportunity. So from that perspective, then we start to see soul evolution is the only thing worth doing on this plane. It doesn't really make any difference what our role is in this lifetime. All it is, it makes a difference and it's our role. But whether we're the president or the janitor is completely immaterial as far as soul evolution goes, because the person that's the janitor, if they're learning the lessons that they have to learn there, maybe humility, maybe perseverance, and doing something really hard over, for a long period of time that way, they're the ones that succeed in this lifetime. And the guy that's the president may be just digging him a bigger hole. So he's may put himself back 5 incarnations because of the way he abused his power. You can never tell from the outside. So comparing ourselves to anybody else is a waste of time, if not worse. It's what do we do with what we have? What comes to us? Do we say yes to it? Do we accept the challenges? We not even think, oh, I don't need that lesson. I already did that one, but here it comes again. Well, it's nice to kind of give God the benefit of the doubt and say, maybe he knows better than we do. And say, okay. So all of those things take us to a point of freedom. Take us to a point of freedom where we don't care. We don't care in that sense. We care in the sense of sharing and loving and those things, but we don't care in the sense of what happens to us. We're completely happy. Because we know that whatever God's will for us is the absolute best possible avenue for us to unfold. So I wanted to close with a reading from Whispers that addresses this point. Unless my bookmark fell out. Let's see. Yep, here it is. Oops. Well, that was not the one I was thinking of. Oh, here it is. Okay. Mother Divine, the brave may laugh as they pass among flying bullets, though death threatens them with each one. I laugh, however, because whether I am floating on the surface of this present life or sinking beneath the waves of death, I rest forever in thy protecting omnipresent eternal life, held safely forever in thy immortal arms. I'll meditate briefly.